Despite the ATF's recent best efforts, 80% lowers have always been legal, and making your own firearms is an American tradition. And yet, a 22-year-old from Minnesota is facing felony charges for possessing 2 guns that he made from 80% lowers, even though Minnesota doesn't have any laws against privately made firearms. Stay tuned for the details. Hello everyone, and welcome back to the channel. This story was sent to me by a viewer via a crowdfunding page for the young man's legal battle. The story has since been covered by a local news outlet, but otherwise hasn't made much of a splash. But before I get into it, I need to thank Blackout Coffee for sponsoring this video. Blackout has been a big supporter of the channel for a few years now and also does a lot to support veterans and Second Amendment rights. They send coffee care packages to those serving overseas and have special brews that donate directly to some of the best gun rights groups. To check them out and help support the channel, go to blackoutcoffee.com/libertydoll. In May 2022, Matt Walker Anderson was shooting on private property with a friend in Sherburne County, Minnesota. A neighbor called the police, alleging that a stray bullet shattered his door. The charging documents don't really provide any evidence to confirm this, only saying that the neighbor heard a sound like breaking glass on a lower level of his house, and then later saw that his door was broken. Either way, the cops showed up to the range, inspected the property, and asked to see Anderson's guns. Anderson and his friend complied, showing the officers their guns, which included a firearm that Anderson had made from an 80% and thus did not have a serial number. This got him a ride in the back of a cop car, his guns confiscated, and he was detained for several hours. Suddenly, 6 weeks later, he was charged with 2 felonies for possessing guns without serial numbers. The state statute that the deputies cited for the charges refers to federal law, a federal law that only applies to manufacturers, importers, and those in the business of making firearms. 609.66 Firearms, Removal or Alteration of Serial Number. Whoever commits any of the following acts may be sentenced to imprisonment for not more than 5 years or to payment of a fine of not more than $10,000 or both. 1. Obliterates, removes, changes, or alters the serial number or other identification of a firearm. 2. Receives or possesses a firearm, the serial number or other identification of which has been obliterated, removed, changed, or altered. Or 3. Receives or possesses a firearm that is not identified by a serial number. As used in this section, serial number or other identification means the serial number and other information required under United States Code Title 26, Section 5842 for the identification of firearms. That section of U.S. Code says that each firearm imported or made by a manufacturer has to have a serial number. It also includes the terms maker of a firearm, which historically has meant someone in the business of making guns, like a gunsmith. It was added to the U.S. Code in 1968 and was last amended in 1976, long before the ATF decided to mess around with parts kits being considered guns. And even so, a judge recently ruled that requiring serial numbers is unconstitutional. Seeing as Anderson did not remove the serial numbers, is not an importer, and only made the guns for his own personal use, his mother Sarah assumed the charges would be dropped. Unfortunately, that's not the case. Under the plain meaning of the statute, the rifles made and possessed by Anderson were not firearms as contemplated in the federal law, and thus no serial number was required, his attorney said in court documents. Federal law does not require serial numbers to be placed on personally manufactured firearms created for private use. Setting the precedent set forth in Bruin, he further argued, commercially manufactured or imported firearms were not required to have serial numbers until 1968, and personally manufactured firearms still do not require a serial number under federal law. There is no historical tradition or authority to ban possession of rifles and shotguns that are in common use and circulation that are suitable for civilian purposes and target shooting simply for not having a number engraved on the metal. The Minnesota Gun Owners Caucus says that 609.667 is a reference to the NFA, and its senior vice president, Rob Dorr, argues the federal government does not prohibit the manufacture of firearms for personal use and creates zero requirements for serializing personally manufactured firearms. The clear intent of the statute is to prohibit possession of unserialized firearms that fall within the National Firearms Act regulations. It cannot possibly be construed to extend beyond those types of firearms because before 1968, firearms were not required to even have serial numbers. But there's been no question that those are still legal to own today. In fact, the Minnesota DNR auctions off serial-less firearms every year. So, pot, meat, kettle? Certainly on Anderson's side is the fact that, prior to building the guns in question, he even contacted the ATF to make sure it was on the up and up. The ATF agent gave him the green light, saying there were no state or federal laws against it. Whether he got that in writing, I don't know, but we have covered on this channel the importance of getting the Fed boys' words in writing. Anderson is expected in court on September 5th. His family has tapped into his college fund to pay for his defense, but has also started a Give, Send, Go that I will link down in the description. He faces 5 years in prison for each charge. But beyond absolutely ruining his life, a conviction would also set a precedent of making every unserialized firearm, including those made before 1968, illegal overnight. And so, many of Minnesota's gun owners would become instant felons. That is it for this video, gang. You guys know the algorithm drill. Like, share, and subscribe if you are new here. Ring that notification bell. Leave your comments down below to help boost the algorithm. And as always, thanks for tuning in, and happy shooting.